Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. Broadcasting across all our digital platforms throughout the United Kingdom and around the world, we're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m. We're on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on TikTok. Welcome to you all. Now, please do send in your comments. Please do send in your questions. We love to hear from you. Please tell us where you're coming from, and we'll give you a shout out. And first in the studios tonight was Michael Bridges. Hi, Michael. And that Preston journalist says, "Evening, Alistair. Hope you are well. Looking forward to the show." We definitely are. Thank you very much, that Preston journalist. And we advise everybody on YouTube to please follow that Preston journalist. Simply search for his name on YouTube, that Preston journalist, and you'll find him. Great commentary and regular commentary every day by video. Hello to Ross, says, "Good evening, fellow Brits and Unionist friends from around the UK. I hope you're doing great, Alistair. It's always a great day here in the great British city of Glasgow in our wonderful Great Britain, Ross." Vanessa says, "Some flags for our delectation. And good to see Adam in the house. United as one, divided by none," is Adam's catchphrase. And Harry, nice to see you again this week. And Ross says he's loving the new intro. Glad you like it, Ross. Thank you. Good evening to Miles and to Richard and to Malcolm, who is all the way from Johannesburg, South Africa. I used to know a Malcolm Freed. Tell me if it's the same one, please, Malcolm. Adam says he's just watched video on Rwanda and that the policy is working. We'll come back to that maybe later. Kenny says hi from East Kilbride, and Rita says sorry she missed last week. We missed you too, Rita. We missed you too. Say hello to Sally Melville and Christopher, last week's winner of the prize. And we've got another wee prize coming up tonight at the bottom of the hour, which will be for this little Union Jack keyring, which is also a trolley token that you can use on trolleys throughout the United Kingdom. And it's got a wee hook there to use. That'll be coming up. The prize will be at the bottom of the hour. The question for that at the bottom of the hour. Malcolm says it's not the Mr. Freed that I used to know. Well, nice to see you anyway, sir. Peter says good evening from Stoke-on-Trent, and Catherine back in the house as always with hi everyone. Well, quite a bit to talk about. Tell us what your thoughts are, please, on Elon Musk taking over Twitter, essentially buying it and getting main control over Twitter. Is it going to make a difference or is it not? It's perhaps too early to tell, but please tell us what your thoughts are on Elon Musk. Our thoughts are it's generally a good thing. If he is going to, as he says, make the algorithms open source. Now what that means is he wants to reveal the codes behind it, because these are the codes which some people suspect are set in such a way as to restrict the growth of certain types of accounts. No guessing what sort of accounts those are. And some people have suspected that there's a thing going on called shadow banning. And this has definitely restricted the growth, in some people's opinion, of certain sites. And so if you make the algorithms open source, what that means is that anybody can get in and examine them and try to come to their own opinion on the matter. So that's at least one good thing that he might be doing. Alex, will I now have my Twitter ban overturned? Well, you know, we got cut off of Twitter in the end of 2020 for 4 months, and we thought it was a bit suspicious because it was basically 24 hours after us reaching the magical figure of 30,000 followers. Just a few hours after that, we automatically got suspended, and it was nothing that we had said, nothing that we had done. We were always very careful to follow the Twitter rules, and so we made an appeal and we explained our position, and we made 6 appeals on a regular basis. And then one day we woke up in December and we had a message from Twitter saying, we've looked at your appeal and you're reinstated. And the only explanation we got was that it was a mistake. They admitted to having made a mistake. Now, that was absolutely mysterious. We've never reached 30,000 again. We've basically just stuck around about 27,000, despite posting and tweeting at least 5 or 6 times a day, quality original content very often, and we've found growth extremely difficult since then. But nevertheless, we've got 27,000 followers and we tried to make the best use of it. But we'll see if growth is going to be easier over the months to come, and if it is, then we'll certainly tell you. We'll certainly tell you exactly our thoughts. But if you've been just suspended, then make an appeal and you might get it overturned. If you've been absolutely banned, though, then it'll be harder. You'll need to come in with a new email address and try to start again. But if your account's simply suspended, you might have a good chance of getting back on again. Peter hopes that Elon Musk will stop the fascism and allow two-sided dialogue. And Adam wonders if it will be the death sentence for cancel culture. Ross Andrews says, I think it's early days, but I think it will be a good open source platform instead of being a fairly sanitized platform. Alex says that none of his appeals were ever answered. None of our appeals were ever answered either. We never ever got one. It was just one day we woke up and we got a message. I don't even know if it mentioned our appeals. It just said you're back on. We've reinstated your account, and that's basically all it said. We did a program about this actually back at the end of 2020. But don't expect your appeals to get answered. Don't expect that. Just hope that one day you wake up and you get back on it again. But as I say, you'll only get back on it again if you've just been suspended. If you've been banned, you won't get back on it unless you change your details and come in as essentially a new figure. Good to see Malcolm from Pitlochry. Now, somebody mentioned there about the flag in the background. We're flying this flag during the course of these Falkland War commemorations. The Falkland War, of course, was 40 years ago, and over the course of April, May and June. So we'll be flying this flag up until Liberation Day in the middle of June. That's why we're flying the Falklands flag, which says desire the right, desire righteousness, named after the ship Desire, captained by John Davis, who was the first to spot the islands in 1592. I don't know where you can get that flag, though. Somebody just sent it very kindly to the office. If the person who sent it to us is watching, perhaps they can put up the link to where you can actually get that flag. Thanks very much. Ibrox Park says, hello from the great county of Down. Been a while since I've seen the show live with commitments, but always watch the shows at a later time. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much from to Ibrox Park in the great county of Down. Yeah, indeed. Well, something I want just to start on today is quite good news in a way, but I don't want to get anybody's hopes up. This is information that was coming out of Parliament this week, that Lord Foulkes, the Labour peer, is going to try to table what's called a private members bill. And I'll just bring up the information about it here. And it's on this site. It was in the Sunday Express, and it's got a kind of funny heading: Westminster plan to block IndyRef. What this is about is get rid of that breaking news. Who cares? What this is about is a bill that would essentially block Nicola Sturgeon's plotting for another referendum to break up the United Kingdom. And it would do so by vetoing any spending, any British taxpayers' spending from the British Treasury that went to things which are actually reserved, such as, for example, especially the Constitution, especially planning for another referendum. And as we know, there's hundreds of thousands of pounds being spent every year on planning for another referendum. British civil service is being paid by the Scottish Executive taxpayers' money that comes from all over the United Kingdom in order to pay for Nicola Sturgeon, to pay British civil servants to break up the British state. The whole thing is an absolute farce. It's absolutely mad, should never ever have happened, and is a consequence of successive British governments not having the moral stamina to stop this. And it's really gone too far. And we've pointed it out, and other people have pointed it out, and Lord Foulkes is trying to do something about it. He's tabling a bill which would mean here, as it says, the First Minister would have to scrap her expensive team of civil servants who are working on plans to break up the United Kingdom at taxpayers' expense. It would also have to rein in its lavish spending on overseas offices and instead join with UK government efforts to promote Scotland abroad. Hallelujah! That's what they should, of course, be doing. And it's the brainchild of George Foulkes. And so that's all good news, until you get to the realistic bit, which is that this is called a private members bill. And this is an antiquated way in which any MP at Westminster or any Lord can introduce a bill, introduce a law for debate. But what has to happen is everybody who wants to introduce a law has to get it written up. And then they have to put it into a ballot, and it gets drawn, and there's only one or two, or only a handful of private members' bills that get drawn each year. And of that handful, only one or two will ever see the light of day in Parliament. And statistically, the chances of a private members' bill ever reaching the House of Commons and being voted on is statistically minute. So we can basically say it's not going to get done. But one good thing is at least he's highlighting it and he's putting together opposition to it. And that's long before time. And something that actually is a little bit worrying is he has said that that he's basically not getting much support for it. He says, I've spoken privately with ministers and advisors. Here it is. I've spoken privately with ministers and advisors, and I'm getting a reluctance from the UK government for some reason. A reluctance. Can you imagine that? They don't want to upset the SNP, and I think they are afraid of being seen to be engaged in a power grab. Oh yes, a power grab indeed. It's the SNP that are engaged in the power grab. It's the SNP which is using British taxpayers' money, which is using our money in order to spend it on things which are outside of their remit. That's the power grab. Simply correcting that is just setting things up normally again. And Folks continues, but I keep telling them that there is a big difference between devolution and independence. The SNP don't understand that, and the Tories don't seem to understand it either. Well, isn't that so true? A reluctance from the British government to actually ensure that British taxpayers' money is spent where it should be spent. That's terrible to hear. But anyway, best of luck to Lord Folks for doing that. Let's hope that he's lucky enough to get it drawn in the ballot, and let's hope he's lucky enough to just get it heard in Parliament. And if it ever gets voted on, that will be a miracle, but at least he's doing what he can, which is 1,000 times more than what the British government is doing at the moment. So just wanted to give a shout out there to Lord Folks for that tremendous work. And Alan says that the UK government should have a veto on more aspects. It certainly should, and it should be very bold about simply standing up for its proper constitutional position, which is the British government, whose job is to hold Britain together. Its job is not to encourage the Scottish nationalists to break up the country. Its job is not to give our money to the devolved assemblies when the devolved assemblies are going to use that money in order to figure out how to destroy the state itself. It's absolute madness, and we talked about this in our magazine, of course. Do more together. Do more together. And specifically, we said we need a law to stop the civil service pushing the Indy agenda. And we actually wrote the law, and there it is in 6 legally proficient paragraphs. And we ended, for the avoidance of doubt, it shall be an option for the UK government in Scotland to take full control of any department of the civil service in Scotland when it is the opinion of the Cabinet Secretary, in agreement with the Secretary of State for Scotland, that the department is in contravention of any paragraph or sub-paragraph above. In other words, we're going to take the issue completely out of your hands if you insist on misbehaving, if you insist on spending money that you're not entitled to spend money on. That's what we need, a law to prohibit any part of Her Majesty's Home Civil Service from having any role in any activity which acts against the integrity of the United Kingdom. And if you want to read it more in full, then please do get a copy of Do More Together, and you'll find the link there in the thread. Absolutely so important. Talking about what's important as well, of course, is voting. Voting at the council elections, which are a week tomorrow. Okay, a week tomorrow. Don't forget, folks, the council elections are a week tomorrow. And if everybody who doesn't like Scottish separation, if everybody who doesn't like the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon gets out in voting, then there'll be a landslide for Unionists. The problem is, of course, that most Unionists don't vote at council elections, and that's an absolute crying shame. But if you get out and you vote for anybody but the SNP or the Greens or Alba, then you're going to stand a good chance of changing the councils. And remember, it's proportional representation, so your vote will count. Your vote will count, and the person that you vote for will have a good chance, because it's proportional representation, and you're voting in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And you don't have to vote for everybody. Now, talking of that, we got sent, I mentioned last week there was a party standing called British Unionists, and we got sent this leaflet about their candidate, who is standing for a party called British Unionists. This chap is the only candidate in Scotland, and he's in the Fortisset ward Fortisset is a ward in North Lanarkshire. And it says here, vote number 1, John Joe Leckie, Thursday 5th of May in the Fortisset ward. And it's very, very professionally designed leaflet, very interesting. John Joe Leckie, British Unionists, number 1. That's in the Fortisset ward. And for what I've heard, he stands a very good chance of being elected, because there's four candidates in that 4 seats in that ward, and last time round at the by-election he beat the SNP. So that will be interesting. Keep an eye out for that one, the British Unionist in the Fortisset ward. And that's a party, it's a specific party. It's not an independent candidate, it's a specific party. British Unionists.org is their website, apparently. Good. So, Kenny says the UK government seem to be scared of the Holyrood SNP, and isn't that a crying shame? Isn't it? Absolutely. Richard says, it's the law is an ass. It seems that some in the British government are also afraid of the Nats, or afraid of provoking more Scots to support the Nats, but that's not the way it works. The Scots who want to support the Nats will support the Nats, and the ones who don't will be shouting hallelujah from the rooftops. And but as Richard says there, the government in London doesn't seem to know that. It seems to think it's going to be the opposite. It seems to think it would provoke Scots, when in fact it wouldn't. It would just bolster the support for the Union. Aye. We're talking about bolstering the support for the Union. We have, as many of you all know, what a great commentator we have for the Union in the shape of Neil Oliver, who speaks on GB News every Saturday. And he always gives us a 10-minute, 8-minute talk about whatever is on his mind. And it was a classic talk last week, which was about the importance of being proud to be British and not apologising, and loving your country, and also quite metaphysical as well, because he was talking about the extent to which nations depend upon the stories that are told. And if the stories of the nation stop being told, then the nation itself will struggle to have an identity and will struggle to exist, certainly in the forms that it has in the past. So it was a really thoughtful, well put together point of view, and we're going to use bits of it for our amazing TikTok channel. But the reason that came to my attention was because he annoyed all the right people with his talk. And in yesterday's National, it says here, TV historian, not to put it in inverted commas, TV historian Oliver's rant sparks anger. And the anger apparently comes from Tom Devine, who is an academic historian. And Neil Oliver will always be the first to tell you that he's not an academic historian, he's an archaeologist. But he's very much a popular historian, and he conveys history in a way that's highly accessible to us all. And he's produced amazing popular histories of Britain, of our coastline, of Scottish history, of Vikings, of all sorts of things. He may as well be a historian. He's what I would call a popular historian, Neil Oliver. However, Tom Devine has got a bit of an issue with that, and because basically, well, I don't know why he's got an issue with it, but he's really nasty in this article here. He's really nasty to Neil Oliver. You know, Tom Devine, who I thought was fairly level-headed, in this article, he's really nasty. Top historian questions media culture for facilitating Oliver rants. And he's going on about, this individual has no formal historical training, either at the undergraduate or postgraduate level. Unlike him, of course. Unlike Devine. But persists in being asked to pontificate on issues of Scottish history, when there are so many excellent experts on the nation's past working in our universities. Aye, there might be, but not a single one of them has the flair or the ability to communicate history in the way that somebody like Neil Oliver can communicate it. Okay, so what you've got there with Devine is what I would call expert envy. I just made that term up. It's expert envy. He's an expert. Devine thinks he's the expert, so he's the one that should be on the television. He should be the one getting all the credit. He's the academic. Why aren't they coming to me? Why are they going to this jumped up guy with long hair who also happens to be a unionist? Well, and then he even says that some sections of the print and TV media obviously think their readers and viewers still find Mr. Oliver of interest. When that assumption changes, his public profile will vanish without trace. Well, that's a very nasty thing to say, Mr. Devine, and it doesn't do you any good. And you just come across there as somebody who's jealous of the attention that Neil Oliver's getting. And I'll tell you why Neil Oliver's getting the attention, quite frankly, because the difference between Neil Oliver when he communicates history and the difference between you when you communicate history is like the difference between a fine wine and a half-drunk bottle of Newcastle Brown that you found under a hedge. Okay. Oliver's flair and ability is so much greater than Devine's. That's why Oliver gets the attention on the telly. And so I'm afraid Mr. Devine is just going to have to stick that up his kilt and deal with it. But I'm very disappointed in Tom Devine because he does write some good books. He does write some good books. And I mean, he's an interesting historian, but there's no need for that we've hissy fit, a complete hissy fit. And I know why it is. It's expert envy. Expert envy. That's what that's all about. Which actually leads us on quite nicely to the bottom of the hour, which is our On This Day in British History. And we always ask a question afterwards, and the winner will get this little trolley token, a Union Jack trolley token, which is also a keyring, heading the way to them tomorrow. So, on this day, what happened on this day in British history? Well, today is the 27th of April. And here's an interesting thing, right? This is a quirky one. In 1652, Oliver Cromwell published a declaration prohibiting the export of Irish wolfhounds out of the island of Ireland. He wanted their numbers to be maintained in order that they could properly hunt the wolves, because apparently in 1652 there was an epidemic of wolves, especially around the Dublin and Wicklow mountains, and in fact they were so overrun with wolves that people would come from throughout the British Isles to kill them for a bounty. And one of the best ways of apparently dealing with them was to hunt them with these big wolfhounds, which must have been harder than wolfhounds today, because whenever I've seen a wolfhound, they seem like soft as anything. But apparently they must be able to take on a wolf. Anyway, this is Oliver Cromwell. He stated, "For as much as we are credibly informed that wolves do much increase and destroy many cattle in several parts of this dominion, and that some of the enemy's party, who have laid down their arms and have liberty to go beyond the seas, and others, do attempt to carry away several such great dogs, whereby the breed of them which are useful for destroying wolves would, if not prevented, speedily suffer decay. These are therefore to prohibit all persons whatsoever from exporting any of the said dogs out of this dominion. And to this day, you could say maybe Oliver Cromwell saved the Irish Wolfhound, because it seemed that many of what he calls there the enemy's party were exporting them out of Ireland and taking them with them out of Ireland beyond the seas. And of course, to this day, the Irish Wolfhound is very much a symbol of Ireland, and it is the mascot of the Irish Guards. And we have a photograph there of a wolfhound. There's Lady Carrickfergus, as she is known in her Ireland capacity, presenting a shamrock to the mascot of the Irish Guards at their barracks in London, which she does every year on St. Patrick's Day. And she's involved there because Baron Carrickfergus, which is to say the chap there on the far left, he is the honorary colonel of the Irish Guards. Lovely picture there. I think the outfit for the officers of the Irish Guards is like so kick-ass. I mean, I just love that. It looks great, that one, actually. Good, okay. So, talking about wolves, there's people in Scotland, or there's people in like English universities who think it would be a good idea to introduce wolves to the abandoned Scottish Highlands, which is hopefully going to be just like another pipe dream, quite frankly. But then again, things are so absolutely crazy in Scotland these days that it could well be the case that they stick these wolves up there. Absolute madness. It's like beavers as well. They want to introduce beavers, and so the beavers, because it's good for the environment or something. It's good for beavers. It's not good necessarily for the environment. I mean, beavers make dams, and it's like you can't go up to a beaver family and say, "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Beaver and your wife and kids, I was wondering, could you make your dam over on that part of the river, please? Because we've been looking at the topography of this area, and we think it would be more efficient for you to build a dam over there and not here, because if you build it here, it's going to flood all of these fields." You can't do that. And similarly with wolves, people say, "Oh, they don't touch you, they're fine, they're harmless, just leave them to their own devices, just don't hassle them, just don't go near their territory." And you say, "Well, what's their territory?" And they say, "Oh, 20 square miles. If you go within 20 square miles, you might start to hassle them." That sort of thing. It's absolute madness. And again, it's going to be like Oliver Cromwell's day. They'll just roam all about the place and just eat whatever they want. And this is another thing, like some of the animal welfareist people, they say, well, it will keep the deer population down. So you've got these animal welfareists who want wolves, and they're happy to think of a deer being chewed to death from the hindquarters upwards, as if that's like going to add to the edification of our countryside. So it's just, when you hear it, you just know it's just another thing that somebody thought up in an office that doesn't live anywhere near the Highlands, that doesn't know anything about the Highlands, that is just going to mess up everything if they get given the ability to do it. So here's hoping that we don't have any wolves. But if we do, we're going to have to start breeding wolfhounds again, I guess. What happened else on this day? The Palace of Westminster, otherwise known as the British Parliament, had its foundation stone laid on the 27th of April in 1840, after a fire had destroyed it in 1834. So yeah, that's on this day in British history, 27th of April, 1652. Oliver Cromwell declares an edict to keep the Irish Wolfhounds within Ireland and to prohibit their export. So that's something to thank him for, if nothing else. Yeah. Richard says, Do More Together is winging its way to Lord Folks and friends. Good stuff. I'm glad. We always encourage people to buy 2 copies. One for yourself and one for a legislator or an opinion former or anybody that you think ought to see it. And talking about... Here we go, hang on. Yeah, we definitely don't vote for the Greens or at the Scottish Council elections. No, they're as bad as others, and I'll be talking about them in a minute, actually. Ibrox Park says their election is for the so-called Assembly, not for the Council. Yes, slightly different there in Northern Ireland. Next Thursday, a week tomorrow. Ross is talking about Joe Leckie there, the British Unionists candidate. That's a good name, British Unionists. I like that name for a party. Who do you stand for? British Unionists. Yeah, that works. Oh, thank you, Adam. He says, you need to get on to GB News so we can promote the union more. Well, wouldn't that be nice? That'd be a turn up for the books. Well, we send GB News all our stuff anyway. We send them copies of Do More Together. We send them copies of 10 Years Strong. We send them copies of the wee book, so they know about us. They know about us. Whether they've got the nerve to have us on or not is entirely the question. Let's hope so. Lots of comments. Ibrox Park says Neil Oliver is great. Rita says they despise Neil Oliver as it tells the truth. Neil Oliver for First Minister. Neil Oliver is outstanding, says Ross. Adam says we need Neil Oliver on here as a guest. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Nelson says Neil Oliver, probably the most loved historian on our British television. Absolutely, let's show Neil some love. And Christopher says Devine has some nasty nationalist tendencies. Yes, and calling people names and just doing them down and being nasty about them, that's a nationalist tendency. I've noticed that Unionists are far too polite, and I include myself in that, far too polite to be nasty to somebody, unless in a jokey way, like the fine wine versus the half-empty bottle of Newcastle Brown that you found under a hedge. Jokey way. But the nationalists are much more to the point nasty, which is a sad reflection on them. Yep, Devine is jealous. No question. He is usually more balanced. Devine is usually more balanced. I don't know what's got into him. He's just obviously annoyed that he's not getting any of the attention and the love that Neil Oliver's getting. And, okay, so the question for the competition and the it's to win this Union Jack trolley token. Okay? Send your answers, please, folks. Don't put them in the thread. Send your answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk, and the first person to get the right answer will be sent this tomorrow. And if you've never done this before, you'll be in with a good chance of winning. So please do try. Please do try. And just send it to contact@aforceforgood and the .uk. And the question is, what kind of dog is the mascot of the Irish Guards? Okay, the Irish Guards have a dog as a mascot. What kind of dog is it? There you go. Fairly straightforward question. Now, talking about history, we've got a new set of articles that we're going to be rolling out over the next month, one a week. We put out the first one yesterday. These are 4 articles which are examining the 1600s, and especially overt Unionists in the 1600s, but also Unionist tendencies in the 1600s. And we're going to be emphasising and looking at the extent to which, for example, Scottish royalists fought with English royalists during the British Civil Wars, to what extent Scottish Covenanters fought with English parliamentarians during the British Civil Wars. And we're going to be making the case that during that period, which was the 100-year run-up to the Parliamentary Union, the Scots and the English were siding with each other on both sides and on all sides. And we're just going to be looking to the extent to which that was bringing the concept of Britain, the nation, into clearer focus, and also the extent to which we have a democracy today, and importantly, the extent to which the constitutional monarchy still survives is as a consequence of the Scottish and English royalists on the one hand, and the Covenanters and parliamentarians on the other hand, fighting in their various ways for their particular things, and ensuring through time that democracy was enhanced and the monarchy was maintained, creating a very unusual British history that we enjoy, and a wonderful heritage that we are able to enjoy today as well. So that's 4 articles. We're going out one a week, and we put out one yesterday which was called On the Union of Britayne, Robert Pont and the Unionism of a Scottish Reformer. Because, of course, a lot of it was religious back then, when religion was politics. Good. Now, where are we? Yes, busting Indy Myths. Folks, we are busting Indy Myths on the daily, weekly, monthly and yearly, until the Scot Nats see clearly. That's what we're all about. Busting Indy Myths. And in this Busting Indy Myths part 14, we're going to examine the oft-heard myth that the SNP has a mandate for a second referendum, and if you don't agree with that, then you're undemocratic, and if you want to stop a second referendum, then you're anti-democratic. In other words, that it's undemocratic and anti-democratic to oppose a second referendum. We're going to be looking at that. And we say, in opposition to that, we have a democratic mandate not to have a second ref. Now, why is it important to look at this? It's important to look at it because the SNP has a strategy now of deliberately calling people who don't want a second referendum anti-democratic. And that's really quite a nasty insult. But I see it all the time now when I read The National. For example, the president of the SNP, who's a fellow called Michael Russell. He was quoted in yesterday's National referring to some individual, Rory Stewart, and he called them, he is every inch, quote, an anti-democratic Tory, close quote. Well, of course, he's always got to get the wee Tory insult in there as he sees it, but an anti-democratic person. That's a really, that's a really nasty insult to make of anybody who has been an MP or who is in the parliamentary system or who believes in our system. To call them undemocratic or anti-democratic is really a cutting insult. And they're doing it a lot now. They're doing it a lot. If you dare say, I don't think we should have a second referendum, they'll say you're undemocratic. If you say, I'm going to work to stop a second referendum, they'll say you're anti-democratic. Now, on what grounds do they base this claim? Again, I'm going to show this as a groundless claim. But upon what sugary grounds do they base this claim? It's largely based upon the results of the 2019 British general election and the 2021 Holyrood election. And as I'm about to show, we are the ones who can say that we have a democratic mandate not to have one, as measured by the votes for the parties, not as measured by the seats won, but as measured by the votes for the parties. We are the ones that have the democratic mandate not to have another referendum. Now, the SNP says that because they've got the most number of seats, because they won the most number of seats in the 2019 British general election, and also the most number of seats in the 2021 Scottish election, that they have the mandate. But they're only looking at it as far as seats won. They're not looking at it overall as votes for parties. And so let's look at it. Let's look at it that way then. So we've got a graphic here that we'll put up for the 2019 British general election. We'll just take away that red beam at the bottom. This is the 2019 general election in Scotland. Now, there was 59 seats that were won in Scotland, and as you can see, the SNP won the majority of them, 46, Conservative 6, Lib Dem 4, and Labour 1. But look at the figures if we break it down for total vote of parties in Scotland against a second ref. We know that the Conservatives, Labour, Lib Dems, Brexit Party and UKIP were against. And together they got 1,484,740 votes throughout Scotland, or almost 54% of the total votes which were cast. And you look at the parties that were for a second referendum, which in 2019 was only the SNP and the Greens, and together they got 1,270,502, or 46% of total votes. So in 2019, even though the SNP won the overwhelming number of seats, they only did that as a consequence of the first past the post system. When you actually break it down as far as parties against or for a second referendum, the parties against a second referendum won overwhelmingly with 54% of the total votes. And these figures there are taken from the source at the bottom, which is the Wikipedia page. And there was others who stood in constituencies in Scotland first past the post, a few independent candidates and a few others, but we don't know their stance on the matter, and together they only took up 3,819 votes anyway. But so you can see that's very clear that as far as the general election, as far as the government and Parliament, which governs us at the moment, is concerned, the overwhelming number of people in Scotland who voted in 2019 voted for parties against a second referendum. Okay. And let's just very briefly go back 2 years previously to 2017. and the British general election. And it's even more pronounced then that of the people voting against a second referendum, almost 63% of total votes cast were for parties which were against a second referendum, and 37% of votes in Scotland were cast for parties which were for a second referendum. Even though, of course, the SNP, through the first past the post system, won overwhelmingly the number of seats. Okay. Now, let's go to the 2021 Holyrood election. And this is, you've got to remember, of course, this is the constituency vote, because you get two votes. You get your constituency vote and you get your regional vote. We're only looking here at the constituency seats to make our particular point. But of the 73 constituency seats, the SNP won 62 of them, Conservatives 5, Labour 2 and Lib Dems 4. But look at the votes. Okay, the total, sorry, let's put that back up. Total constituency vote for parties in Scotland against a second referendum is 50.5% of the total vote. And that was for Conservative, Labour, Lib Dems, UKIP, and a tiny number there for a party called Reclaim. And the total constituency votes for parties in Scotland which were for a second referendum is 49% of the total vote. And those were SNP, Green, and a couple of smaller parties. And the parties listed at the bottom there stood in the constituencies, but we don't know what their position was on a second referendum. But again, it's only a very small percentage of the vote. So again, if we look at the constituency vote only at Holyrood in 2021, again, more people voting for parties against a second referendum. Okay, now I'm not making a case here one way or the other for the first past the post system. I'm simply just pointing out those facts that we as Unionists have an absolute right to emphasise that we have a democratic right to oppose a referendum. The SNP talk as if they've got some kind of democratic mandate. Well, as we've shown in the 2019 general election, especially in the 2017 general election and in the 2021 Holyrood election, in both cases, as measured by people who actually voted in the constituencies for parties opposed to a second referendum, it is us, Unionists, who have the democratic mandate to oppose a second referendum. So when people accuse us of being undemocratic because we don't agree that they have a supposed mandate, or when they accuse us of being anti-democratic because we don't want to have another divisive referendum, we point out these democratic results and we say, firstly, don't imagine you are the only ones who can talk about a democratic right or who believe that they have democracy on their side. What about our democratic right? What about our democratic mandate? What about our democratic right not to have another referendum? And of course, we can also add that it's very undemocratic of you, Scottish nationalists, to continue to ignore the results of the 2014 referendum and basically pretend that they didn't exist. Especially when Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon told us several times that it was a once-in-a-generation event. So basically, to conclude, we, as Unionists, we have a democratic right not to have another referendum. We have a democratic right not to have another referendum. We have a democratic mandate not to have another referendum. Okay, that's the end of Busting Indy Myths Part 14. We'll be back with another Busting Indy Myths Part 15 next week. But I just had to get that off my chest because I've been reading this a lot now about how we're somehow anti-democratic, as if they've got the right, as if they've got the democratic right. No, look at the votes. We've got a democratic right too, and our democratic right says we don't want one. Yeah. So it seems that the nationalists care only about their rights. And there are so many myths to bust. Again, Christopher says, the nationalists don't like the fact that more people voted for Brexit than voted for the SNP. Yeah, and a lot of their supporters, of course, a lot of SNP supporters voted for Brexit as well, which is perfectly understandable. Well, yeah, once in a generation. And Alex Salmond wrote about it in this book, which he got the British Civil Service to produce, called Fraudulent Costs. Or he actually released it as its anagram, which is Scotland's Future. And in Fraudulent Costs, at the very first page 1 there, it says, if we vote no, blah, 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 a once-in-a-generation opportunity to follow a different path, blah, 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 blah. And then you've got an actual message from the man himself, where again he talks about it. Here we go. Blah, 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 blah. A rare and precious moment in the history of Scotland. A once-in-a-generation opportunity to blah, 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 blah. And then here in their official question and answer bit, if Scotland votes no, will there be another referendum on independence at a later date? And this is paragraph 557. It is the view of the current Scottish so-called government that a referendum is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. There you go. From the horse's mouth themselves. And this is another disgrace, because this massive document, Fraudulent Costs, aka Scotland's Future, was produced, of course, by the British Civil Service at huge expense, and you could get it free. You know, you could send away for it, and they would send it to you free. Think about how much money we British taxpayers, we who were on the no side, think about how much money we paid in our taxes that went to Alex Salmond so he could pay the British civil servants to produce this, to break up the United Kingdom. Absolute madness. Utter madness that we live in a country that allowed that, and that continues to allow it, that pays for its own destruction. I mean, I'm all for British tolerance and all these fabled virtues, or much vaunted virtues, I should say, or maybe fabled, I don't know. But paying your political opponents to destroy your own country is madness. And that's a step, that's tolerance too far, quite frankly. So we're actually at the top of the hour. Goodness me, that went awfully fast. And we have a winner. Fantastic. We have a winner of this keychain and Union Jack trolley token. And the winner is Jeff Baker. Great stuff, Jeff. Well done. Well done. We'll send that off to you tomorrow. Good. Well done, Jeff. So As Ian says, 8 years is a generation in Sturgeon's constituency. A generation in Scotland is about 30 years, says Richard. When the average woman has her first baby, a lifetime is about 82 years. The average time someone dies after being born. Ian says, fraudulent costs, that anagram has to be divine providence. Doesn't it just? Well, Nelson says, well done, Jeff. And Debbie says, congratulations, Jeff. As does Catherine. Well, folks, it wouldn't be a Good Evening Britain if I did not mention, please do get your wee book. Please do get your wee book, and you can get it in the shop. That's where to get the wee book, folks. Please do. It's only a £5. And also you can get 10 Years Strong in the shop. And you can also get Do More Together in the shop. And we do punt this stuff because that's what keeps us going, and we've got a busy summer of activism ahead. We're really looking forward to it, and we're gonna need your help to get us through that. So thank you to everybody who's been watching tonight. Thank you to everybody who has commented, and we'll be back next week, Wednesday the 4th of May, which will be the day before the council elections on the 5th of May. And so until then, folks, thank you for watching. It just remains for me to say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the Queen. See you next week.